Shavua Tov. Yesterday in Mishnah Yomi, we began the 10th chapter in Yevamot. Today we're on Mishnah Bet, the second Mishnah thereof. Niset Olpi Beit Din. A widow or a presumed widow gets married with permission of Beit Din, permission of the court. Now, we recall yesterday, one witness came. So it was on the word of one person. She got remarried. It had to go to court, and they checked it out, and we assume that she checked it out. As we explained yesterday, the Gemara makes an assumption that a woman will be very, very careful, very aware of the circumstances, try to do a thorough investigation before she relies on one person's testimony that her husband has passed away to get remarried. So if she got remarried through this one person testimony through the court, teitze, and the husband comes back, the original husband, she has to divorce, paturim in a carbon, but she is exempt from a carbon. Now, normally, if somebody does such a grave infraction by mistake, they at least bring a carbon hatas, as we discussed for breaking Shabbos, for doing a malacha, an activity on Shabbat, there's a carbon, and this carbon chatat is to atone for the mistake. But here, even though she made a mistake, it was really a mistake done through the decision of the court. The Mishnah gives the other case, lo niset al pi beit din. She didn't remarry based on the court's permission, meaning two witnesses came, and they said, we both saw together your husband passed away, or we saw the dead body, or whatever it is. Teitze chevet b'karbon. If the real husband shows up, she has to divorce the second one. She can't, as we said yesterday, she can't remarry the first one. And she has to bring a carbon chatat in this case. Even though, yes, she relied on the testimony, it's still a mistake that she made. Basically, it was her decision to rely on them. So the Mishnah comments, Yafei koch beit din shepoter min the carbon. So the strength of the court is greater, that it exempts her from liability, because it's also, responsibility also rests on the sages of the court. Horucha beit din nase. If the court decided that she's allowed to remarry, the halcha v'kilkala, and she goes and ruins herself, meaning she doesn't get married, but she's involved intimately with someone else. Hayevet b'karbon. She does bring a carbon when her original husband comes home. Shaloi terua elenose. The permission wasn't to go and be promiscuous. The permission was to go and get married. Now let's go on to Mishnah Gimel. Haisha shalach balam uvno. So here's a variation. Her husband and his only son went overseas. Uva'u v'amru lo, and they came and they told her, Metz boilich, unfortunately your husband passed away, v'achar kach, and the next day, met benech, unfortunately the son also passed away. So in such a case, there was never an involvement of Yibum. Yibum and Chalitza was not required because there was existing offspring to the deceased husband when he passed away. So V'niset, she goes and marries some other guy. And afterwards, they tell her there was a terrible mistake. We checked the records, we checked with the hospital. Chiluf chayu hadvarim. It was actually the opposite. So the son had passed away first, and then afterwards, her original husband passed away, which means she should have received a chalitza or been married in Yibum by the surviving brothers. Teitze, she has to divorce the new husband. V'havlod rishon v'achron mamzer, and a child she has from this husband, whether this child was conceived before or after this corrected testimony, mamzer, is illegitimate, unfortunately. Amrullah, next case, they told her, met b'nech, your son died overseas, acharach met b'alech. Afterwards, the husband died. So we assume she needs a Yibum or Chalitza. And she married in Yibum one of her deceased husband's brothers, presumably deceased in this case. Well, actually he was. They told her, chiluf chayu devarim, we checked the records, we were wrong. The son had actually perished after the husband, so there was no mitzvah of Yibum. If there's no mitzvah of Yibum, that's actually an aveira, a serious aveira of somebody marrying the wife of his brother. Teitze, she has to divorce the Yavam, the brother, v'havlod rishon v'achron mamzer, and any children in this relationship are illegitimate. Now, this is a mamzer according to everyone. In the first case, it was she should have received Yibum in the first case and went and married someone unrelated, not one of the brothers. That's only a mamzer according to Rabbi Akiva, but the halacha and the Gemara says we don't pass him like that. But in this case, it was a man marrying the wife of his brother when there was no mitzvah of Yibum. So everyone agrees that's an Isser Karet of spiritual excision. So the Vlad would be mamzer according to everyone. That's one of the amazing features of Yibum, is that it's a humongous mitzvah. It's a tremendous mitzvah to bring an heir into the world to take the place of the deceased. But if it's done incorrectly and there wasn't a mitzvah involved, then it's a terrible aveira to marry the wife of one's brother. Mishnah goes on, Amrula, they told her, Met Bolich, your husband passed away, Veniset, and she gets remarried. Achar kach Amrula, Kayim Chaya. He was actually alive at the time you got remarried, V'met, but now he's passed away. So understand, it could come up, he was in the hospital, he was on life support, and they thought he was dead, and he was able to be revived, but at the time they thought he was dead, someone sent a messenger out, he's overseas, someone sent a message to the wife, and it turns out he was resuscitated, and he lived for another 6 months, it could be. So it could be. Ve'avlad rishon mamzer, achron eno mamzer. So a child conceived before the actual date of death is an illegitimate child. The first husband was alive, so the second marriage was meaningless, was adulterous. But if she had conceived a child after the actual date of death of the first husband, then it was not a mamzer, it was a valid child. Amrullah, next case, they told her, Met bailich, your husband has passed away overseas, nit kodsha. And she goes and receives kiddushin. Someone gives her a ring, the first stage of a Jewish marriage. Now, at this stage of kiddushin, she's a married woman, but they're not living together. They haven't gone to chuppah, they haven't moved in together. Achar koch babaila, then the original husband does show up. Turns out the testimony was wrong. Muteret lachazor lo. She can go back to the original husband. Of course, the second kiddushin was meaningless because no one can do kiddushin on a married woman. That's a meaningless act. Afal pishanaton lachron get, and even though we make the second one, who was never really a husband, give a get, lo pasola min kahuna. This get does not make her unable to marry a kohen. Doesn't make her a grusha. At Zaydor Rabbi Elazar ben Matya, and Rabbi Elazar ben Matya explained this is hinted to in the pasuk. Isha grusha meisha. It disqualifies a Kohen from marrying a woman who's divorced from her husband. V'lo meisha eno isha, but not from a random guy who did kiddushin, but it was a meaningless kiddushin, and he was never really her husband. Yashko chachem and sei gesund.